Let's look at Ecclesiastes chapter 12, verse 1 through 8. And it says in verse 1, remember your Creator in the days of your youth, before the days of trouble come, and the years approach when you say, I find no pleasure in them. Before the sun and the light and the moon and the stars grow dark, and the clouds return after the rain, when the keepers of the house tremble and the strong men stoop, when the grinders cease because they are few, and those looking through the window grow dim, when the doors to the streets are closed and the sound of the grinding fades, when men rise up at the sound of birds, but all their songs grow faint, when men are afraid of heights and of dangers in the streets, when the almond tree blossoms and the grasshopper drags himself along in desire, has no longer stirred. The man goes to his eternal home, and the mourners go about the street. Remember him before the silver cord is severed or the golden bowl is broken, before the pitcher is shattered at the spring and the whale broken at the well, and the dust returns to the ground it came from, and the spirit returns to God who gave it. Meaningless, meaningless, says the teacher, everything is meaningless. And then we'll also look at Ecclesiastes chapter 3, and just in verse 1. So we'll look at Ecclesiastes chapter 3 a little bit more later, but I just want to read verse 1. Ecclesiastes chapter 3, verse 1. It says, there is a time for everything and a season for every activity under heaven. And so the title of today's message is, there is a time for everything. There is a time for everything. So we are now walking towards Christmas. So we have celebrated Thanksgiving with a big turkey. You guys came to my house and we celebrated Thanksgiving together. We were so grateful to God to have one another and be in fellowship as a church. And now we are walking towards Christmas, the last month of the year, December, and towards Christmas. And so as we begin to reflect on this year, we should think about the times that we have lived. And so here, the book of Ecclesiastes, this writer, what kind of book is Ecclesiastes? Well, if you look at the scope of Ecclesiastes, it is a book of wisdom. There is, in the Old Testament, you could sort of classify it. There is the law, right? And so this is like the first 5 books of Moses that Moses wrote. And then there is then the history, so there are Kings and Chronicles and so on and so forth. And then if you look later on inside of the Old Testament, there are the prophets, right? But between the history and between the prophets, there are these book of wisdom, like Psalms and Proverbs and Ecclesiastes. And so when we think about it in the path of faith, we desire and wish for wisdom in the path of faith, right? And so what is wisdom in the Bible? And what is really the definition of wisdom overall? It's not necessarily the same as being reasonable or smart or clever, right? And so you can be a reasonable, smart, and clever person, but then there's someone that will look at you and say, well, you're not wise, right? And so it's a really different type of term, right? To be wise. And so what kind of person is wise? And so usually we look towards perhaps our seniors, right? The ones who have more years on us, or grandparents perhaps, right? And so you become wise really as you get into your older age, I suppose. And so here, the book of Ecclesiastes, when we look, it was written by King Solomon, right? So we consider him the wise king. And here, Ecclesiastes was actually written towards the end of King Solomon's life, right? And so this was at the very conclusion, towards the end in his old age. The King Solomon had experienced so many things in his life, and he is writing this book of Ecclesiastes to really speak about that, right? And so he really wishes to relay his wisdom to all of us, right? And so what kind of wisdom does he give to us? Well, when you look at the first passage we read in Ecclesiastes 12, what does it say at the very end of that passage? It says, everything is meaningless, right? Meaningless, meaningless, right? Everything is meaningless, says the teacher. And so, this this meaningless, right, and what it's recording here, actually, you know, when you look at this translation, it's slightly off, right? So, yes, I think meaningless is probably the best term in English, but it's trying to speak about like going into nothingness, right? Is really what it's speaking about. So if I were to use a phrase to describe what this word meaningless in the original word is, it's like going into meaningless. It's trying to say, for example, that things are vain, right? It's all vanity. And that's how some people translate it. They say vanity. Vanity is how this goes. But what even vanity, if we look at that word, it sort of has this connotation of being like, you know, I dress well and makeup and, you know, how I look, right? That's what it means. But actually what it's trying to say is that everything is in vain, right? So all the things we do are in vain. And so that's why I do think meaningless is the best translation. But in truth, it's actually like sort of going into nothingness. And like the things that we do, they don't have meaning, they go into nothingness, right? It fades away. And so really that's what he's trying to say. It's that everything we do on earth fades into nothingness, right? And so, you know, if we, you know, go back and think like wisdom, right? And so how is wisdom? It seems pessimistic. You know, if we read just this passage, right? Meaningless, meaningless, it goes to nothingness, it's all in vain. It seems pessimistic. But actually, this is a very deep, profound teaching, and it is actually wisdom, right? Because when you actually really look back at our lives, and you really reflect on your lives, you really come to find that. You see about the things that we have and we don't have, and you really realize that so many things, right, are in vain, and what is precious and what we do have and what has been given to us is life, right? And so the things that we get and the material things and the money and all the things of this earth, they really are in vain, but truly what the great gift that God has given us is life itself. And so how amazing is this life that God has given us? The fact that we just like live like that is a blessing in itself, and that is really what is most precious out of all things. And so if we were to take life, right, and so if we were to speak about life, how can we quantify life? Like, what can we call this life, and how can we quantify this life? Well, this life is time, right? So that's another way of putting it. This life is time, right? And so life is time. So if we're going to quantify life, then we call it time. And so if I speak about time, there's this one fun science fiction movie that I think gets it right. And so in that movie, the actual currency in that movie, in that world, is time. Right? And so, you know, people wear some kind of wristband on them, and then it like counts down the time, and this is currency. So if you want to buy food, you have to give a little bit of your time, and it's some kind of currency. And so I kind of think it gets us right. It's saying, you know, that's the message behind the movie. Your life is time. And so, you know, if we were to quantify our life in any way, you see that this world quantifies it in many different ways. You know, about how much money or influence or power that you have, but in actuality, I think the best, you know, the true measurement really when you look at it is, it's the most valuable thing, it's the most precious thing we have, is time. And so the wise teacher, you know, he is talking about this, you know, time. We read that there is a time for everything. Time is most important, right? And so we get that in our life. We get life and we get time in our life, but the last passage we read, it's very accurate. It's like meaningless, right? And so, though we have life and though we have time, it goes into nothingness. Let's go to Hebrews chapter 9 and in verse 27. The Bible teaches us this very clearly. Hebrews chapter 9 and in verse 27. In verse 27, it says, "Just as man is destined to die once, and after that to face judgment." And so the Bible is 100% clear that there is no one who escapes death. Right? And so we have life and we have time, but then eventually no one escapes this. Right? No one escapes this. There is death, right, at the end. And so even if you are like a rich, powerful king or emperor, you look at all the rich, powerful kings and emperors. Now, did any of them escape this fate? No one. No one did. If we look at the most rich and powerful people on this earth right now, the presidents and the CEOs and all of these things, is any one of them going to escape the grave? No, of course not. Not at all. And so the Bible teaches us this precise truth. It teaches us that when it comes to all of us, no matter what we have and what we gain on this earth, this is a set destiny, right? And so this is a very, very set destiny. There is an end. There is this set destiny. This destiny of death, in fact, is set from creation, right? So the moment that we are born, this death is set, right? And so we are born, but the death at the end is all set. And the Bible is very, very clear on this. And so, it's very sad, right? And so we think about it, and it's very sad. And it seems like this teaching is pessimistic. It's like a pessimistic thing. Is the Bible teaching us a pessimistic view of life? I think if the Bible, it just ended there, then that would be a really sad story, right? That would be a really sad story if it's true. But as we know, the Bible, as we look at the totality of the Bible, and as you come here every Sunday and you listen to message, and we speak about the Bible and God's grace and His love and His blessings, we know that the Bible doesn't teach a pessimistic view, right, at all, right? And so if we just read that portion, it seems pessimistic, but on a whole, on a total, as we read the Bible, we know that the Bible has an optimistic view, right? Has an optimistic view of life. And how is that and why is that? Well, the reason why is faith in Jesus Christ, right? That is the reason why. The reason why we have an optimistic view is faith in Jesus Christ. And so even though the reality of this world is this pessimistic view, that if we were to live in this view, it would be pessimistic, but because we have faith in Jesus Christ, we can have optimism, right? We can have optimism. It's that no matter the cross of death, right? Even if that is something set, right? Hebrews chapter 9 says that everyone will die and face judgment. We will face that death. But the Lord says in the very core of the gospel, so if we were to summarize the gospel, the life of Jesus, down to one core thing, it is the cross and the resurrection, right? But it's not one or the other, it's both that are inextricably linked, right? So we cannot speak about the cross without the resurrection, nor can we speak about the resurrection without the cross. These are inextricably linked, right? And so when we know about the cross and we understand about the cross and that cross is the cross of death, then what comes out of that is the resurrection, which is life, right? And so even though there is death, there is life, right? There is the cross and the resurrection. And so that is, fundamentally speaking, the teaching of the Bible, the teaching of the gospel, the teaching of Jesus, the teaching of the core of His life, which was the cross and the resurrection. It's not the opposite way around. It's not life that ends pessimistically in death, but it is, even though there is the death of the cross, there is the resurrection of life, right? And so this is really the core teaching of the Bible. And we have to remember that no matter how much we think of things, right? And so interestingly, this was a few months ago. I was at a Christian conference and I had a debate with a fellow Christian in ministry. He's a Christian minister. He's a Christian in ministry working in the public square. And so the debate that we were having is that when you look at the world, so I'm not talking about other things, but I'm just talking about the world itself and the progress of history. We were having a debate, is this pessimistic or is it optimistic? That was our core debate. So as we look at the world and the progress of history, is it pessimistic or is it optimistic, right? And so because he works in the public square, and this means like basically politics, right? And so he works as a Christian in this world. And then so he was debating with me, he thinks it's all pessimistic. That's what he said. Working in politics and I think working in the public square and even looking back at history and how this world has progressed, he says all the progress that we've made is just a facade, right? It's fake, it's a facade. Everything is actually getting worse and worse and worse, was his view. And so, I took a different view, as I had a long dinner with him. It was like 3 hours long. We debated, and, I was telling him, well, I come from San Francisco, right? And so, in San Francisco, we have a kind of a different view. We're like techies, here, Silicon Valley, and we're techies here. And so if you look at the tech people in San Francisco, they have this optimistic view, right? They have this optimistic view. It's not perfect, but, the progress is getting better and better. And so, my view to him was that, it may look a little bit messy, it may look a little bit, and who's doing what, and all this kind of stuff, but, eventually somehow God guides it, right? God guides it. And so, you can start to know my view, a little bit on things, right? And so, so the thing is, here the thing is that we both believe that, humans are limited and incapable, right? Both him and I, no one is denying that. As humans, we are both limited, as humans, we are all limited, we are incapable. And so, for us, we both believe that because we're limited and incapable, the Lord has to return, right? The Lord has to return, and that is how the kingdom come here on earth as it is in heaven. But, his view is just, he sees it getting worse and worse and worse before Jesus returns, and I see it as, God building it better and better. And of course, humans, we cannot do anything. We are sinful. The progress is limited and sinful. And, we on our own, we cannot build a better and better world. If we're just left to our own devices as humans and we're sinful, I was telling him I believe the same thing. Left to our own devices in this limited human way, the world doesn't get better and better on its own. In fact, you're right, it does get worse and worse on its own. But what I was trying to tell him was that, but God is still amazing somehow. Like God is above the fallenness of humans. That no matter how much humans, by our own, left to our own devices, we are limited and fallen, and it does get worse and worse, but somehow his sovereignty transcends, and his resurrection, and he overturns the sin, and somehow it gets better. I mean, it does get pretty bad on this earth, but he still develops. He overturns things. It gets really bad. Like the course of history, everything you see in the news, it gets worse and worse. But somehow he still guides it in overall, not in the near term or not what you can see in certain examples, but overall there is a direction that he is going. And so I think it was a few days ago, I had a Bible study with a student, and so all of you guys learn Bible study. We do Bible study in Romans 5, right? And so there is Adam and there is Christ, right? And so how is history? It's like a big X, right? It's like a big X, and so it's like a graph, is what I'm trying to say. It's like a graph that's like an X. And so immediately from the fall of Adam, right, you are talking about separation from God. There is no history of God, but God, he starts to find his history again. There is Seth, and there is Noah, and there's Abraham, and Isaac, and Jacob, and all of those people, right? And so, here it's broken from God, right? And there's only sin and death inside of this world. But then, God is still working in history, but, those people of faith, those forefathers of faith, could not overcome the sinful history. And so the sinful history was always winning. But, it goes and it goes and it goes, and God builds this history, and then just at the right time, he sends his son, Jesus Christ. And so, X marks the spot. Jesus, he's the one that really overturned history. And how has it been since then? It has been the history of life. Life, grace, and blessing. And so, there is still the sinful history, but ultimately what we know is that sinful history is going to reach its conclusion, right? All the sinful things, no matter what, sinful things are not eternal. Right? Sinful things are not eternal, and they will fade away. It's just a matter of time. And it's just a matter of time for all of it to fade away. But, when you look at the Lord Jesus Christ and the grace and the blessing that overflows, it's just eternity and His eternal grace, overflowing more and more and more. And so the Lord overturned this, and so God's kingdom, really when you think about it, is inevitable, right? It is inevitable. And so, really God will bring it. The Lord will return, and this is the inevitable victory of the kingdom of God. And so, here, we really see this progress in this way of history. You kind of see my view. And so when we think about that, let's go back with that kind of view, understanding this meaninglessness that this wise teacher is talking about. Let's go back to Ecclesiastes chapter 3, and I want to read the full thing this time. So Ecclesiastes chapter 3, from verse 1 through 11. Right? Ecclesiastes chapter 3, from verse 1 through 11. It says, "There is a time for everything, and a season for every activity under heaven. A time to be born and a time to die, a time to plant and a time to uproot, a time to kill and a time to heal, a time to tear down and a time to build, a time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to mourn and a time to dance, a time to scatter stones and a time to gather them, a time to embrace and a time to refrain, a time to search and a time to give up, a time to keep and a time to throw away, a time to tear and a time to mend, a time to be silent and a time to speak, a time to love and a time to hate, a time for war and a time for peace. What does the worker gain from his toil? I have seen the burden God has laid on men. He has made everything beautiful in its time. He has also set eternity in the hearts of men, yet they cannot fathom what God has done even to me." So what is this wise teacher, King Solomon, saying? He is saying there's a time for everything, right? God allows us to experience all things, right? And so, so He experiences all of these things, and we have a time for all of it here and there. So even as we look at this year, we had, we lived 1 year, 11 months. We're going on to December soon. We could experience many, many things, and when we look at our life and we look back at our life, we can experience many, many things. There's a time for this, a time for that, is what the teacher is saying. But, we have to think as we look over this past year, and as we look at the time that we have lived, even in our life, what is the wise teacher helping us reflect on? It's like, what is the point of it all? Like, what is the point of all that we experience? And so if I talk like this again, then once again, it seems pointless, right? It seems very nihilistic. And so, how are humans and what must we know? So you can think of it like nihilistic, like all the things we experience, like what is the point? Here, what the teacher is saying, right? So he asks, what does the worker gain from his toil, right? And so there's a time for God's laid burdens on us. There's a time that we lived on this year, on my life so far, and there's so much toil, there's so much work, there's so much burden on us, and that seems very nihilistic, pessimistic. It seems like, what is the reason for it all? What was the point of it all? But in verse 11, it sort of flips around, right? And so there's all this time that we spent doing all these things. There was the toil and there was the burden, but all of it He makes beautiful in His time. Right? So, God is amazing like that. Somehow, He takes all of that and mysteriously makes it beautiful in His time. And so, really when I look back at 1 year, that's what happens to me. I kind of think, well, I did this and I did that, and what was the point of it all, right? But, still, if you look at God, He still makes it all meaningful, right? He still makes it all, everything beautiful, He still makes it beautiful. And where does He set that beauty, right? Where does God set that beauty and that meaningfulness? It says He has set eternity in the hearts of men, right? So there is such thing as eternity, and it's in the hearts of men, right? We cannot fathom what God has done from beginning to end. We cannot fathom all of those things, but still, He set it in eternity and in our hearts. perhaps in our hearts we can fathom it. We can't fathom them up here, but in our hearts we can fathom it. And so the fact that there's eternity, right? The fact that we have faith that there is eternity teaches us that when it even comes to ourselves and our own creation, like who we are, we don't just have physical bodies, right? It's not we just have our physical body and then that physical body fades and it dies. And then, it seems just like very pessimistic, nihilistic in that way. But what the Bible teaches us is that we are more than just our physical bodies, right? That we have our hearts, and this heart is longing for something more than the things of this world. It longs for eternity, right? It longs for the eternity given to us. So this eternity that is set inside of our hearts. This is not something that is bought, right? This is not something that can purchase with money. This is something given to us, right? It says very clearly in the wise teacher, it says, He has set. It means God has set, right? And so He has set eternity in our hearts. And so it's been given to us. And so we are given to us in our hearts this eternity that is set. We can't fathom it, but as humans, it's kind of special. We can contemplate it, right? And so we cannot fathom it. It means we cannot fully understand that eternity, right? We won't know and we won't understand heaven and eternity until we are there. Right? Until we are there, then we will know and we will see and we will understand. But until then, we cannot fathom it. But on the other hand, as humans, we are special because we can reflect on it. We can contemplate it. This is something animals can't do. If you're an animal, that's what's special about us, right? So we can contemplate it, we can think about it, right? That, He really did give us a heart, right? An animal doesn't think about that, right? But as humans, we can think He has given us a heart. And when I say heart, I'm not talking about like the beating heart. I think it's kind of there, but it's really like heart as in our spirit, right? As our spirit, our soul. Just like a deer pants for water, the soul longs for more than just the things of this earth, right? It longs for God, it longs for the Lord, it longs for heaven. And so, as we do experience time and life, right? So I said to quantify life is to speak about time. And so as we think about time and life, the soul that we have, and that's what's wise. As we get older and older and older, actually that's what we desire more. More than desiring the things of this earth, we want and we long for something more and beyond, right, than the things of this earth. I think this is why, when you look, even scientists, right? Even scientists believe in Jesus. Like, why? Like, why do so many scientists come and believe in Jesus? It's because they realize all these things as they study the universe and this earth and this universe and all these things. That, as you really study this earth and as you really study this universe, it's very, very amazing. It's like very orderly. This universe is very orderly, it's very systematic. It's built on physical and mathematical laws. You look in biology and the way our bodies function and the blood flows from this organ to the next. When you look at this earth in geology and you see how the ecosystem and the animals and the plants and everything flows together, it's very, very systematic, right? But even as you study how systematic and functional we are, at the same time, there's a spiritual quality, right? You see a spiritual quality in this universe. You see a spiritual quality, in this earth. You see a spiritual quality in, of course, ourselves as well, too. We know that we are more than just the sum of our parts, and some of our parts working together. There is this invisible quality. Paul calls it, in Romans chapter 1, this invisible quality, this spirituality in creation. And so there's the mystery, right? That is the mystery. There is the mystery of the heart that we have. And so how amazing is that scientists, they look at this, the vast cosmos of the universe, and the vast history of this universe that is billions and billions of years, or maybe even beyond that, we don't know. And then out of all of that, the tiny speck of dust of this planet, this blue earth, and everything that is here. And looking at all of it, like all of this vastness, and it came down to this small earth and us, living all on this earth. And when you start to contemplate it all, and then coming down to us, we have to think about it. Like, was it a coincidence? Like us being here, and my life, even up until now, was it a coincidence, or was there a creator, right? Was there a creator? And so, think about it. The scientists even realize, this coincidence is impossible. Like, can you just like keep flipping a coin, right? And you keep flipping. There's a coin, right? And so you keep flipping that coin, and it keeps landing on tails, right? It keeps landing on tails. And so if you flip the coin, there's heads and tails. So I'm not saying it's a fake coin; it's a real coin. You keep flipping it, but it keeps landing on tails. And so it lands on tails 10 times or 100 times. And can it land 1 million times? Just keeps on landing on tails 1 billion times or 10 billion times. But that is when scientists really think about us and our creation and who we are. Those are the chances. That's like the chances, and it's like I have to keep flipping this coin, and 1 billion times it keeps flipping on the same side. No, it's not like that. There must have been a creator, right? And so, really, the creator is driving all of creation, right? And so, that's the mystery of everything that we see, on earth. We cannot, we can't help but have faith in God. Like, how are we here, right? We can't help but faith on this God. Think about it. Even the fact that we are still living and breathing every day, and it's just not destroyed, right? What if all of a sudden the trees just no longer produced, took in the carbon dioxide and produced the oxygen? What if that just one day it just stopped, and then everything would just die, right? That's what would happen. We can't breathe, and it would just be destroyed like that, right? What if that happened all the time? Or let's think of something else. Let's say, for example, the gender percentage, right, in this world, right? What if that was just completely destroyed, right? Then of course, then life would eventually be destroyed as well too. But for some reason, people are born, and then I have 3 boys, and so really, sometimes that happens. But in another family, they have 3 girls, and then it's really and there's a country that tried to control this, and then it messed many things up, right? But it just. It's so mysterious. It just happens like that, and God, He works it out, and He doesn't. What does that mean? It just means that God, He not only created us, He preserves us. That's His love, right? God created this world, and there are chances that all these kinds of things to destroy this world. You keep flipping the coin, right? You keep flipping the coin, and then you think it's just going to happen that we are here, and then now we're here, right? So then now we're here, and you keep flipping the coin. Well, obviously the coin's going to land on the other side, and we should all be destroyed, right? That is really how it should be. But we're here. We keep going, and that's because of God, right? The Creator God who preserves and guides us. He is the Creator God, and so you really we cannot help. There's something in our spirit that knows this, right? There's something in our spirit that knows this, that there is an eternity and there is God, and so this passage about time and eternity. It is meaningless. Things here on earth, life is limited. We will die of this earth. But what we should know is that there is a creator, right? There is a creator, and He does give us meaning. There is a purpose, right? There is a purpose in our life. And so what is the purpose of our life, right? And so where we get the purpose, right? We get it from the creator. That's obvious, right? When you think about it. So, let's say I have a cup, right? I have a cup. And so, does the cup, sit there and then think about what is my purpose, right? No, the purpose was given to it. We created the cup, and the cup has a purpose. It's to, drink the water. And so, the Creator is the one that gives the creation its purpose. And so, really when you think about us for the Creator, we have a Creator, right? We do have a Creator, and He is the one that gives us the purpose. But, how are humans? We forget about God. We don't think about God. And so we create instead of our own purpose. All we think about all the time is money and sex and all these other things of this world, but, they don't satisfy us. The Lord is my satisfaction. He is the hidden treasure. We must know Him. We must know the purpose of our existence, really. Really all of this visible existence, the visible existence is all it is true. It is pessimistic. All the visible existence, it is pessimistic. I'm telling you it's pessimistic. It's going to just fade into the dust. The visible, tangible, things of this earth, it is pessimistic. It is going to fade into the dust, right? But, even though that is going to fade into the dust, there is something that remains. God. And He has set eternity in our hearts. And so, we must fulfill eternal purpose instead in our hearts. Those will remain, right? Eternal purpose, eternal things will remain. And so, our time, we must use it according to the purpose, not that we as man are setting, but according to the purpose that the Creator God has given to us, right? And so, even Jesus, He told His disciples like that. He says, don't do that. Don't go and just be fishers of men, right? Like meaningless every day. How is a fisherman? He goes every day and he fishes and he catches some. Sometimes there's good fish. Sometimes there's, he doesn't catch anything, right? And then you feel hard when you don't catch, but sometimes you feel good when you catch. But same day, everything, fish, right? Fish, and it's just like the same thing, monotonous like that every day. And so, really, living for like just money like that. But, how many people are we, how often are we like this? We just live for that and every day, same thing daily. But He said, no, go be a fisher of men. Right? The purpose that the Lord has given us. And so let's go back to Ecclesiastes chapter 12. Oh, and so today's message, I keep reading passages and it keeps flowing. Pessimistic, optimistic, pessimistic, optimistic. Let's go. Let's read Ecclesiastes chapter 12 once again. And in verse, let's start off from verse 1 and 2. So let's start from verse 1 and 2. I'm going to read all up to the end here, but read verse 1 and 2. Remember your Creator in the days of your youth, before the days of trouble come, and the years approach when you will say, I find no pleasure in them. And so, that's really an accurate description of life, right? So your youth is very, very exciting. But then as time goes on, same things, same daily things that I do every day, and you find no pleasure in them. Right? You find no pleasure in those same things. And then what else? It gets darker and darker. It says in verse 2, before the sun and the light and the moon and the stars grow dark, and the clouds return after the rain. And so it grows darker and darker, and it fades. And life is like that. Life is tragedy, right? But, for believers, we need to know, is at the end just that darkness is the end? No. For us, it goes beyond tragedy. Beyond the cross to the resurrection, it is beyond tragedy. There is a light. There is a light beyond, right? So, but why don't people believe in God? They think, this, right? This everything just fades, the pleasures fade, and it grows dark. They think it's just fate, right? They think that's just fate. It's so pessimistic, and that's just fate. The darkness is fate. And so that's why so many people don't believe in God. So many people don't believe in God because they think that darkness and that fate, that is just the end. But what does the Bible teach us? The light did come. Right? The light did come in Jesus Christ. Let's continue on in verse 3. When the keepers of the house tremble, and the strong men stoop, and when the grinders cease because they are few, and those looking through the windows grow dim. And so this is really, really, really accurate about getting into your old age. And so you get to your old age, the keepers, the legs, they start to tremble, right? And so it's a little bit very pessimistic and very there's that Sphinx riddle. So what starts off on 4 legs and then goes to 2 legs, and then 3 legs. What is that? Well, yeah, of course, that's humans, right? That's mankind. We start on 4, and then we go to 2, and then we have 3, later on. And so, that's what happens to us. The legs start to shake, and then it says the grinders cease, and so the teeth, right? You lose them, right? They cease, like you lose them, and then those looking through the windows, eyes becomes dim. The eyes start to grow dim, right? This happens. And then in verse 4, it says, when the doors to the street are closed and the sound of the grinding fades, when the men rise up at the sound of the birds and all their songs grow faint. And so the hearing, fades, and even the voice, fades as well too. It grows faint, and we should sing praises. If you're young, you should really sing praises now while your voice is strong. You need to know how beautiful it is. I do think that even when a senior sings, and even if the voice is faint, it's so beautiful. It is very beautiful. God, He looks at the heart, not the voice. But if you're young and you do have the voice, then you need to come up here and volunteer, and you need to sing. You need to sing in the front, and you need to powerfully sing praises to God when you're young. And really, because we have the voice, you have the voice when you're young. And then, they rise up so early. My parents were telling me this time that they just, after, they sleep, and then 6 hours of sleep, they automatically get up. Right? And it's so if it's they sleep at 9 or 10 p.m., right, automatically at 3 to 4 a.m., they just get up, without, it doesn't matter. They try to sleep more, they want more sleep, but they just get up. And so let's continue on, and then verse 5. When men are afraid of heights and of dangers in the street, when the almond tree blossoms and the grasshopper drags himself along, and the desire no longer has stirred, the man goes to his eternal home, and the mourners go about their street. Right? And so, afraid of heights. So do you ever see really, old people, they don't climb mountains. You can do that when you're young. I was so grateful that God, I was a Boy Scout when I was a teenager. I climbed so many different mountains. But, nowadays when I climb mountains, if I go along with you guys, this and that hurts. And I'm still at actually an age, I can still do it. But, why? It's because, let's say you slip on, not only is it hard physically, but let's say you slip on something, the bones are brittle, right? And so they don't go. They don't hike like that because, it's like that. And so they're afraid of heights, of dangers, right? And so, even, when you get older, they don't like to fly on planes, right? So it's really hard, flying, here and there. And then, so they don't even take a plane. And then the almond tree blossoms. What is that? Almond tree? What is that? And so, the tree, the almond tree, it gets white, right? That's what it is. It gets white, right? Gray, white. That's what happens when the almond tree blossoms. It gets white, up here, right? Up here in the hair, right? Your hair gets white. And so that's what it is. And then, and really the desires, I had so many desires, so many things when I was young that I desired, but, it fades, right? It fades. And then, if you look in verse 6, remember him before the silver cord is severed or the golden bowl is broken, before the pitcher is shattered at the spring or the wheel broken at the well. And so, whether you talk about you can say, you can call death, one way or another. People, they die of all kinds of things in different ways. But, so it could be the silver cord, it could be the golden bowl, it could be the pitcher that is shattered. They're all different kinds of things, but that's what happens. We will all, as Hebrews chapter 9, verse 27 says, we will all face death. Right? Man is destined to die once. We will die of this earth. Right? And so that's what it says in verse 6. And then verse 7 is a very famous verse. And the dust returns to the ground it came from, and the spirit returns to God who gave it. And so this is opposite of Genesis, right? When we were created out of the dust of the earth, and God breathed the breath of life into it. Right? And that is our spirit. And then finally in verse 8, meaningless, says the teacher, everything is meaningless. Right? And so, the dust, it fades away. We were, that's true, right? So we were, made of dust, right? So, we were made of the stuff. I mean, that's actually, the Bible's so accurate. It doesn't like describe like, oh, you're made of these cells and these organs. And it doesn't talk about that. You've got to read a science book if you want to talk about those things. The Bible just says it very simply. Like, we're just made of the stuff of this universe, of this earth. Like the dust of this earth, right? But how is that dust that we are made of? Well, it all fades away, right? It all fades away, but our spirit returns to Him. And so it's like opposite, right? And so, the dust is meaningless. It's a paradox. We should remember that all the things are in vain. It goes into nothingness. It goes into dust. It is meaningless, says the teacher. Everything is meaningless, but we do have purpose, right? The spirit returns to God. If you look, this is back to verse 1, so Ecclesiastes chapter 12, and in verse 1 it says, "Remember your Creator in the days of your youth." Right? And so what does that mean? And so in the days of your youth. And so you might be thinking, that just means young people. So if you're young, remember your Creator. But it's actually all of us. All of us are children before God. We're all God's children, right? And so what it's talking about, it means people with time left, right? Anyone with time left. That means all of us, right? And so it's all of us now here living on this earth with time left. That's all of us. And so how should we be? It shouldn't be the meaningless things of this earth, but we should live meaningfully in the Creator God. And so let's look at Matthew chapter 6, the final passage today. Matthew chapter 6, in verse 10 through 21. Matthew 6, and in verse 10 through 21. And it says, oh, I'm sorry, did I say 10? 19 through 21. 19 through 21. "Do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth where moth and rust destroy and where thieves break in and steal. But store up for yourselves treasures in heaven where moth and rust do not destroy and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also." And so He has set eternity in our heart. And the treasure in our heart, we should store up treasures in heaven. And so I have life and I have time on this earth. We should store up as much treasure as we can in the place that will last in eternity. And that is in our hearts, where God has set that eternity. And so truly, what remains eternally, right, in heaven, it is the love that we have. To love God and love others. That in my heart, when I use my voice to sing praises to Him and loving God, that does remain eternally, right? That does remain eternally when we take it to heaven. It doesn't disappear. The love I have in my life and my time here on earth, it does remain. Those treasures do remain, and we do store it up in heaven. And so as I love God and as I love others, and so we have to love others too. And so really, why does the Lord call us to serve? As I serve others, as I'm loving them by serving, the love that I have for them, that is also stored, right? And so that is also stored in us. That is stored as a treasure in heaven. And so what else? Like to lost souls, right? And so there's the brothers and sisters I have here, but there's many lost souls out there, and we have to reach out to them. And as I evangelize and I give them God's word like that, that is loving them, right? That is my love for all of them. And that gets stored too, right? All of that is treasure in heaven that is stored in my heart. The eternity that the Bible teaches us is set in heaven that returns back to Him. Really coming to church, how great is it? The greatest treasure of all really is Jesus Christ. And we are so wealthy we will be so wealthy, I think, when we go to heaven. That's the amazing grace and gift that God has given us. And so who showed us that way? Going towards Christmas, we were lost, but God sent His Son, Jesus Christ, to show us the way. Jesus is the way, the truth of His life and the life. By the cross and the resurrection, He opened that path for eternal life for us all. And so I pray we can be the ones that run towards Christmas. Let us not live for the things of this world, but towards the way that Jesus Christ eternally showed us that we should be those ones. Let's pray. Father God, we thank You, Lord. Today we learned about life and time and really the meaning of our life, Lord. That the things of this earth, how we were built in dust, all just fades away and it's meaningless into nothingness, Lord. But Lord, you call us to be wise and remember you, Lord, that you created us, that you are the eternal God, and we will return back to you, Lord. It is because of your Son, Jesus Christ, that we can even return back to you, Lord. And so, Lord, with the time and life that I have now, Lord, we wish to live for your purpose, which is to love you, to love others, to love the many lost souls out there, Lord. May we store up these treasures in our hearts and in heaven eternally, Lord. We thank you so much for your loving grace, being with us as we run towards Christmas, to your Son, Jesus Christ, who came to us. Emmanuel, God with us, we thank you. And in Jesus Christ's name I pray. Amen.